They actually believed a forged document could steal the blood and 6 years of youth I poured into this $500,000 house. But as my lawyer slid that gray folder across the oak dining table, I milled by hand. I realized my parents were fatally wrong. They backed their always silent daughter into a corner, completely oblivious that I had already dug the perfect grave for their entire empire of lies. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us now. Let's begin the story. My name is Emery Peters. The afternoon sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the law firm was blinding, yet the atmosphere inside the room felt like a frozen tomb. I sat rigid in a genuine leather chair, keeping my face completely devoid of emotion as the metallic, distorted voice of my father echoed from the sleek speakerphone resting on the mahogany desk. "I am not asking for your permission, Emery," Arthur barked, his tone thick with the arrogant entitlement of a man who believed the world existed to serve him. "I am giving you an instruction. You are going to sign that property over immediately. Do not force me to drag my own flesh and blood into a courtroom to take what is rightfully ours." He was talking about my home, the Victorian house I had painstakingly restored from a rotting shell into a masterpiece valued at $500,000. Before I could even formulate a thought, a sharp, theatrical sniffle came through the line. My mother, Helen, had entered the fray. She was the master of emotional manipulation, wielding guilt like a finely sharpened blade. "Emery, sweetie, please do not be so difficult," she cried, her voice trembling with manufactured agony. "You know how fragile your sister is right now. Chloe is slipping into a terrible depression. Her brand deals are drying up. Her engagement metrics are plummeting. She desperately needs a luxurious, high-end space to film her content and save her career. That house you fixed up has the perfect aesthetic. You are just a single woman living alone. Why do you need all those empty rooms? Why are you being so viciously selfish when your own sister is suffering?" I did not say a single word. Across the expansive desk, my attorney, Marcus Vance, sat perfectly relaxed. Marcus was a notorious former corporate litigator who had dismantled multi-million-dollar conglomerates before his morning espresso. He flashed a smile that was pure ice, catching my eye. He lightly tapped his silver fountain pen against his legal pad. Tap, tap. It was our agreed-upon signal. Let them talk. Let the enemy expose their entire hand. My silence only fueled my father's misplaced confidence. "You seem to forget who you are dealing with, little girl," Arthur sneered. "I have been in real estate for decades. I hold a legally binding co-signer agreement right here in my hands. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that I co-signed your mortgage 6 years ago. That means I legally own 50% of that house. You have exactly 48 hours to transfer the entire deed over to Chloe. If you refuse, I will file an injunction and drown you in so many legal fees you will be bankrupt before the year ends. Do the smart thing." I leaned forward and pressed the glowing red button. The line disconnected with a sharp click. The silence in the office was deafening. For 32 years, I had operated under the pathetic delusion that if I just worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and demanded little enough, I might eventually earn a fraction of their love. But staring at the black speakerphone, the bitter truth finally crystallized. My family had never viewed me as a human being. To them, I was nothing more than a convenient utility, a workhorse meant to break its back building a castle just so they could hand the keys to their golden child. I took a deep breath, expecting the familiar, crushing weight of panic that always accompanied my father's wrath. But it was entirely absent. Instead, a profound, chilling peace settled into my bones. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, calculated clarity. I was done running. I was done hiding in the shadows. If they wanted a war over my home, I was going to give them a massacre. 6 years ago, before the threats and the legal warfare, this property was nothing more than a magnificent tragedy. I was working as a junior structural engineer at Apex Structural Innovations, spending my days calculating load-bearing capacities for commercial high-rises. But my nights belonged to a desperate dream. I had scoured the forgotten corners of the state until I found her an abandoned Victorian home in Oakhaven, Virginia. I completely emptied my savings account, scraping together every last penny to purchase the property for a mere $65,000. In the real estate market, that price tag was a massive red flag. To the seasoned investors who drove through the neighborhood, the house was a teardown, an eyesore beyond salvation. When I first stepped onto the sagging porch, the sheer scale of the decay was suffocating. The original wooden beams were rotting from the inside out, hollowed by decades of relentless termites and moisture. The intricate slate roof had partially collapsed, allowing seasons of harsh rain to severely compromise the interior framing. Every inch of the galvanized plumbing was rusted shut or burst open, but where others saw an irreversible catastrophe, my trained eyes saw the enduring strength of 19th century bones. I knew exactly how to save it, but it would require a sacrifice I was barely prepared to make. For 6 relentless years, my life was reduced to a grueling cycle of exhaustion. After completing punishing 10-hour shifts at the engineering firm, I would trade my professional slacks for heavy canvas work pants covered in dried cement. I did not hire contractors. I could not afford them. Instead, I became the contractor, the laborer, and the architect. I spent agonizing weekends down in the dark, damp crawl space, digging out the earth by hand and hauling buckets of dirt to manually pour a reinforced concrete foundation. I hoisted heavy steel beams with hydraulic jacks to sister the failing wooden joists, securing the structural integrity of the home one agonizing inch at a time. I spent countless midnights on scaffolding, my hands raw and bleeding, meticulously cleaning and restoring every single exterior brick. My muscles ached with a deep, permanent fire, and my social life evaporated completely. Yet, within those dusty, unfinished walls, I found the only sanctuary I had ever known. The house did not judge me or compare me to anyone else. It simply absorbed my hard work and slowly returned to life. During those agonizing years of reconstruction, my father never missed an opportunity to mock my endeavor. Arthur was a prominent local real estate broker who took immense pride in his tailored suits, his polished luxury sedans, and his manufactured image of upper-class perfection. To him, my dirty fingernails and calloused hands were a profound embarrassment. Whenever I attended mandatory family dinners, smelling faintly of sawdust and sweat, his sharp insults would fly across the dining table. "You are throwing your life down a black hole, Emery," Arthur would scoff, swirling his expensive red wine. "That rotting pile of wood is the ultimate money pit of a loser. Real professionals buy turnkey properties. You are just playing in the dirt like a confused child. It is humiliating for our family name." While he ridiculed my grueling labor, he had absolutely no problem funneling tens of thousands of dollars into his favorite daughter's bottomless pit of vanity. Chloe was determined to become a wealthy lifestyle influencer, a career path that required constant, massive injections of cash. My parents happily funded her luxury apartment rentals, her designer wardrobes, and her extravagant vacations to tropical islands just so she could take pictures pretending to be successful. Chloe never worked a single day of manual labor in her entire life. She was the pristine princess, and I was the dirty mechanic hiding in the shadows of a ruined house. But the universe has a very strange way of balancing the scales. By the time I nailed the final restored piece of trim into the living room and applied the last coat of varnish to the original hardwood floors, a monumental shift happened in the city. The local government announced a massive rezoning and revitalization project aimed squarely at the Oakhaven district. Trendy cafes, boutique shops, and upscale markets flooded the surrounding streets. Overnight, my neighborhood became the most highly coveted zip code in the entire county, and my beautifully restored Victorian masterpiece, standing proudly at the center of it all, saw its market value explode. It was formally appraised at a staggering $500,000. The moment the appraisal documents became public knowledge, The attitude of my parents executed a violent 180-degree turn. The house was no longer a rotting pile of wood or a humiliating joke. Suddenly, Arthur and Helen began eagerly showing up at my front door uninvited. Marveling at the craftsmanship they once despised, I overheard my father bragging loudly at his country club, proudly declaring to his wealthy associates that my home was a strategic family investment property that he had expertly overseen. They were rewriting history, carefully laying down the psychological foundation for the brazen robbery they were about to attempt. They actually thought I would just stand by and let them steal my masterpiece. They had severely underestimated the engineer who built it. Arthur's brazen claim about possessing a legally binding co-signer agreement kept echoing in my mind like a broken record. It defied every single piece of logic I possessed. When I originally purchased the ruined property, I had painstakingly secured a conventional 30-year fixed-rate mortgage entirely on my own merit. I had saved the down payment. I had the stable, verifiable engineering income. There was absolutely no rational reason and no legal requirement for my father to be anywhere near my loan documents. Yet, during that phone call, he spoke with the terrifying conviction of a man holding a loaded gun to my head. He was not bluffing to scare me. He genuinely believed he had legal leverage to take my home. I turned back to Marcus, who was already pulling a fresh yellow legal pad toward his side of the desk. I told him exactly what I knew, outlining my pristine financial history and the solitary nature of my property purchase. Marcus did not dismiss my father as a delusional, desperate old man. Instead, his sharp eyes narrowed with the predatory focus of a seasoned corporate litigator who had just smelled a massive drop of blood in the water. He immediately picked up his office phone. By the following Tuesday morning, I was sitting in a heavily soundproofed, windowless conference room across from a man named Elias. Elias was a private forensic financial investigator who specialized in high-level corporate espionage and complex financial fraud. He did not wear a tailored suit, opting instead for a rumpled gray button-down shirt that suggested he had not slept in days, but the heavy stacks of encrypted files he dropped onto the polished glass table were worth their weight in absolute gold. Marcus and I had hired him to quietly and ruthlessly excavate my entire credit history, and then cross-reference those findings with the intricate corporate filings of my father's supposedly elite real estate brokerage. We needed to know exactly what phantom paperwork Arthur was planning to wave in front of a civil court judge. I had fully expected Elias to find a simple, clumsy forgery, a fake signature on a poorly drafted contract that Marcus could easily swat away in a preliminary hearing. What Elias uncovered over the next 14 days of relentless digging was a sprawling subterranean labyrinth of financial depravity that made the blood in my veins run entirely cold. Elias slid a thick, red-tabbed folder across the glass table. "Your father did not just forge a simple co-signer agreement, Emery," Elias said, his voice completely flat and clinical. "He stole your entire financial identity." He opened the folder to reveal a pristine, formally notarized document. It was a general power of attorney, dated exactly 8 years ago. My signature was perfectly replicated at the bottom of the page, alongside the official stamp of a notary public who, as Elias calmly explained, was conveniently employed by my father's brokerage firm at the time. 8 years ago, I was 24 years old, fresh out of university, working 80-hour weeks to establish my career. Completely unaware that the man who had raised me had memorized my social security number to use as a master key for his own survival. At that specific time, my father's highly touted real estate brokerage was quietly hemorrhaging cash. To maintain his manufactured facade of immense wealth and success at his country club, he had taken out massive, high-interest commercial loans using my untarnished, excellent credit profile as collateral. 2 years later, when I went through the complex process of buying my house, he utilized that fraudulent power of attorney to quietly insert his name onto the title documents behind my back, effectively making himself a 50% owner in the eyes of the county without ever contributing a single dime to the purchase or the renovations. He had legally infected my greatest personal achievement with his toxic financial footprint. The revelation hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the breath from my lungs. But Elias was not finished. The investigator tapped a second, significantly thicker manila folder resting near his elbow. When I started tracing the commercial loans your father took out under your stolen name, the basic accounting math stopped making sense, Elias explained, leaning forward, his eyes locking onto mine. His brokerage was failing rapidly, but the borrowed money was not going toward normal operating costs, employee payroll, or paying off his mounting debts. It was disappearing into a series of shell companies. So, I dug much deeper into his firm's daily operations. Specifically, I audited his client escrow accounts. Beside me, Marcus sharply inhaled, a rare break in his usually impenetrable composure. In the real estate industry, an escrow account is sacred ground. It is the highly regulated, secure holding tank for hundreds of thousands of dollars in client deposits and down payments. Touching even a single cent of that money for personal use is an immediate, catastrophic federal crime carrying mandatory prison time. Elias laid out a long series of highlighted, highly confidential bank statements. Arthur has been systematically siphoning funds from these protected escrow accounts for the past 48 months. He is skimming massive amounts of client money, washing it through limited liability companies registered in Delaware to obscure the origin, and then quietly depositing those stolen funds directly into a private, offshore checking account. Whose account? I asked, though my stomach was already twisting into a sickening, heavy knot. Elias flipped to the final page of the dossier, revealing a wire transfer receipt. Chloe Peters. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, and profound. The intricate web of lies had finally illuminated the dark, ugly truth of my family dynamic. My father was not a brilliant, respectable businessman. He was a desperate, white-collar criminal orchestrating a massive Ponzi scheme. And the hundreds of thousands of dollars he stole from innocent families trying to buy their own homes were not being used to save his dying business. The stolen funds were being pumped directly into Chloe's bank account to finance her superficial, meaningless existence on the internet. The designer handbags, the luxury sports cars, the first-class flights to Paris and Milan, the exorbitant penthouse rentals, none of it was earned through her supposed social media influence. All of it was financed by federal wire fraud, built on a foundation of stolen client money and my hijacked identity. My own father had risked spending decades in a federal penitentiary just to ensure his golden child could maintain the illusion of being a wealthy influencer, while simultaneously trying to steal the only thing I had ever built with my own two bare hands to give her a free filming studio. That evening, I drove back to Oakhaven in complete silence. I walked through the heavy oak front door of my home and stepped into the kitchen I had designed, the white subway tile I had laid piece by piece until my fingers bled and cramped, the custom cabinetry I had sanded and stained by hand while listening to my father call me a pathetic failure over the phone. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, surrounded by the physical manifestation of my hard work. The betrayal was so vast, so deeply woven into my DNA, that it felt like the solid floorboards were giving way beneath my feet. I pressed my back against the cool marble island countertop and slowly slid down until I hit the hardwood floor. I pulled my knees tightly to my chest, buried my face in my arms, and for the very first time since this nightmare began, I broke. I wept uncontrollably. I cried for the 24-year-old girl who thought her father was just overly strict, not a monster who would strip mine her future to feed his massive ego. I cried for the sister I thought was just incredibly spoiled, who was actually a parasitic accessory to federal theft. I cried until my lungs burned and my vision blurred, purging 32 years of unrequited love, desperate hope, and toxic familial loyalty onto the floor of the house they were actively trying to steal. But those tears were finite. When the final ragged sob left my chest, the well ran entirely dry, the grief evaporated, leaving behind a terrifying, empty void. I stood up, walked over to the deep stainless steel sink, and splashed freezing cold water onto my face. I looked at my reflection in the dark window pane above the sink. The frightened, silent daughter who just wanted her parents to be proud of her was completely dead. She had drowned in those tears on the floor. What remained was a cold, calculating structural engineer who understood exactly how to permanently dismantle a failing, rotten foundation. My father had unwittingly handed me the detonator to his entire life. I dried my face, feeling my heart harden into impenetrable stone, and picked up my cell phone to call Marcus. It was time to architect a flawless, inescapable trap. Marcus Vance did not merely practice law. He orchestrated absolute surgical destruction. The following morning, sitting across from him in his expansive office, I watched as he laid out a strategy that went far beyond simply protecting my property. We were going to obliterate my father's meticulously constructed facade and salt the earth where his fake empire once stood. Marcus had taken the explosive financial findings from our investigator and weaponized them into 3 immaculate, lethal dossiers. The first thick binder contained irrefutable proof of aggravated identity theft, detailing exactly how my Social Security number was hijacked 8 years ago. The second binder meticulously traced the fraudulent commercial loans my father secured, using my clean credit as his personal collateral. The third, and by far the most devastating, was a step-by-step forensic audit of the embezzled client escrow funds. It showed the exact dates and times the stolen money was wired into Chloe's personal checking account. These were not drafts for a civil lawsuit. They were formal criminal referrals, complete with banking subpoena requests and federal sentencing guidelines, all properly sealed in heavy-duty envelopes and addressed directly to the White-Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Marcus tapped the top of the stack with his silver pen, coldly explaining that once these files left his office, my father would be staring down the barrel of at least 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I just gave him the nod to proceed with the next phase of the trap. The execution of our plan required my family to feel completely invincible. To catch a predator, you have to give them the absolute illusion of total surrender. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother. When Helen answered, I took a deep breath and injected every single ounce of exhaustion and defeat I could muster into my voice. I played the pathetic, broken daughter they always believed me to be. I am just so tired. Mom, I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. The legal threats, the fighting, it has completely drained my spirit. I cannot fight my own blood anymore. You win. I just want peace for this family. I told her I was willing to surrender the property. I offered to host the formal dinner at my house on Saturday night, where I would officially sign the deed transfer over to Chloe. My mother practically squealed with delight. Her manufactured concern vanished instantly, replaced by a sickly sweet tone of victory, as she praised me for finally seeing reason and sacrificing myself for my sister's mental health. They were so blinded by their own immense greed and arrogance that they did not question my sudden capitulation for a single second. The bait was swallowed whole. But a quiet, private victory inside my dining room was not enough. To truly destroy Arthur Peters, his humiliation had to be public, and it had to be witnessed by the one man he worshipped above all else. That man was Silas Montgomery. Silas was a titan of commercial real estate, the primary financial backer of my father's brokerage, and the sole reason Arthur maintained any shred of credibility in the high society business circles. Silas was old money, strict, and ruthlessly uncompromising when it came to ethics and loyalty. I had briefly met Silas several years ago at a corporate function. Knowing his profound personal obsession with historic architectural preservation, I made a highly calculated secret phone call directly to his private office, bypassing my father entirely. Mr. Montgomery, I am preparing to transfer my fully restored $500,000 Victorian estate into my father's commercial portfolio, I told him smoothly over the phone. Knowing your deep appreciation for historic properties, I would be incredibly honored if you attended a private dinner this Saturday night to appraise the structural craftsmanship before the paperwork is finalized. Intrigued by the prospect of viewing prime, unlisted real estate, Silas readily accepted the invitation. He had no idea he was being recruited as the lead executioner. I deliberately waited until late Friday afternoon to inform my parents that Silas was coming. When I casually mentioned it to Arthur over a brief phone call, his response was immediate and electric. My father was a textbook narcissist who could never resist an audience, especially an audience composed of the wealthiest investor in the entire state. To Arthur, this dinner was no longer just about stealing a house from his weak, defenseless daughter. It had instantly transformed into a spectacular theatrical performance. He would use the evening to proudly showcase his dominance, parading his beautiful influencer daughter and his supposedly massive new real estate asset right in front of his billionaire benefactor. He would want to look like an untouchable king handing down a wealthy empire to his heir. He had absolutely no idea he was eagerly walking onto a scaffold I had built specifically for his professional and personal execution. Everything was perfectly aligned. The lethal documents were finalized, the guests were confirmed, the psychological warfare was complete, and the stage was immaculately set for the most devastating Saturday night of their miserable lives. The dining room glowed under the warm, amber light of the vintage chandelier I had painstakingly wired myself. The heavy oak table, sanded smooth by my own hands, was formally set for 5, at exactly 7 o'clock on Saturday evening. My family strutted through the front door. They did not knock. They entered like arrogant monarchs claiming a newly conquered territory. Arthur wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, exuding an aura of suffocating supremacy. Helen trailed right behind him, clutching a wildly expensive designer handbag, her face plastered with a victorious, condescending smile. And then there was Chloe. She barely even acknowledged my existence. Within 30 seconds of crossing the threshold, she had already mounted her latest smartphone onto a sleek ring light tripod. She twirled around my living room, her high heels clicking aggressively against the polished hardwood floors, actively live streaming her arrival to her imaginary legions of fans. "Hey guys," Chloe cooed into the camera lens, tossing her meticulously curled hair. "Welcome to my gorgeous new content studio. I am so obsessed with this vintage aesthetic. It is going to be absolutely perfect for my new brand launches." I stood silently near the kitchen island, pouring glasses of sparkling water, feeling absolutely nothing for these people. I was just a ghost in my own home, the invisible servant preparing the feast for her executioners. 10 minutes later, the heavy brass knocker on the front door echoed through the hallway. Arthur practically tripped over his own expensive leather shoes rushing to answer it. When he swung the door wide open, his entire posture transformed from an arrogant king into a desperately eager servant. Silas Montgomery stepped into the foyer. The billionaire investor was an imposing figure in his late 60s, possessing piercing gray eyes and a severe, uncompromising demeanor that commanded absolute obedience in the ruthless business world. "Silas, what an absolute honor," Arthur gushed, vigorously shaking the older man's hand. "Welcome to our newest family asset. I am so thrilled you could make time in your incredibly busy schedule to join us for this little private celebration." Silas gave a curt nod, his sharp gaze immediately scanning the intricate crown molding and the flawlessly restored wainscoting. "The craftsmanship is remarkable, Arthur," Silas noted, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "Historic restorations of this caliber are exceedingly rare. I look forward to appraising the foundation." Arthur beamed, practically puffing out his chest, completely blind to the fact that Silas was praising my hidden labor, not his non-existent investment. We gathered around the long oak table. I had prepared a simple, elegant meal, though I had zero appetite. Arthur immediately dominated the conversation, strategically dropping industry buzzwords and subtly bragging about his brokerage's quarterly projections, desperate to impress Silas. As the dinner plates were finally cleared away, Arthur decided it was time for his grand theatrical finale. He stood up at the head of the table, smoothly buttoning his suit jacket. He raised his crystal glass, demanding the attention of the entire room. "Silas," Arthur began, his voice dripping with nauseating, manufactured sincerity. "In the cutthroat world of real estate, we often forget what truly matters: family, the relentless sacrifices we make as parents to ensure our children thrive in this brutal economy. Tonight is a profoundly beautiful milestone for the Peters family. My eldest daughter, Emery, has finally recognized her duty to her younger sister. She is graciously transferring the title of this wonderful property over to Chloe, allowing our family legacy to flourish, because at the end of the day, blood is thicker than water. He looked down at me with a sickening smile, radiating false benevolence. He reached into his inner breast pocket, pulled out a thick, legally binding transfer deed, and pushed it violently across the polished oak surface. The heavy paper slid until it stopped right in front of my folded hands. "Sign it, Emery," Arthur commanded softly, his eyes flashing with a silent, terrifying warning. "Make your family proud." I looked down at the forged document. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I simply glanced over at the grandfather clock standing in the corner of the dining room. It was precisely 8:15. The heavy oak front door, which I had deliberately left unlocked, swung open with a slow, deliberate creak that echoed loudly through the tense silence of the house. Footsteps, heavy and measured, approached the dining room. The atmosphere instantly dropped 20 degrees. Arthur spun around, his face flushing with immediate, violent anger at the sudden intrusion. Marcus Vance stepped into the warm glow of the chandelier. Looking like a sharply dressed Grim Reaper, he wore a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my father's luxury sedan, and his cold, calculating eyes locked instantly onto Arthur. In his right hand, Marcus gripped a battered, black leather briefcase. "Who the hell are you?" Arthur demanded, his voice rising in genuine panic. "This is a private, highly confidential family gathering. Get out of my house immediately before I call the police." Marcus did not even blink. He walked calmly toward the center of the room, stopping directly across from Silas Montgomery. "Good evening, Mr. Montgomery," Marcus said smoothly, completely ignoring my father. "My name is Marcus Vance. I am the senior legal counsel representing Emery Peters. And contrary to what this man just told you, he does not own a single wooden splinter of this house. Furthermore, you might want to review these documents before you ever do business with his brokerage again." The room froze entirely. Helen stopped breathing. Chloe lowered her smartphone, the bright ring light casting harsh shadows across her highly confused face. Marcus unlatched the heavy brass clasps of his briefcase with a loud, metallic snap. He did not waste a single breath on dramatic monologues. He let the hard evidence do the screaming. Marcus pulled out the first thick, red tabbed dossier and slammed it down onto the oak table with a deafening thud. "Exhibit A," Marcus announced, his voice slicing through the room like a freshly sharpened scalpel. "A fraudulent, illegally notarized power of attorney document, utilized exactly 8 years ago by Arthur Peters to completely hijack my client's social security number and financial identity." Arthur's face turned the color of wet ash. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, breathless wheeze escaped his throat. Marcus pulled out the second heavy file and dropped it aggressively on top of the first. Exhibit B, a comprehensive, deeply verified forensic trace of 7 massive, high-interest commercial loans fraudulently secured by Arthur Peters using Emery's stolen credit profile, effectively acting as an invisible guarantor to desperately prop up his failing, insolvent real estate brokerage. Silas Montgomery slowly pushed his heavy wooden chair back. The billionaire's eyes narrowed into dangerous, dark slits. He reached out and pulled the second file toward his chest, flipping it wide open. "This is completely insane," Helen suddenly shrieked, her voice shattering the tension like broken glass. "Arthur, tell him. Tell this lying snake to get out. We are going to sue you for defamation." Marcus ignored the hysterical woman completely. He reached into the briefcase one last time, pulling out the thickest, heaviest folder of them all. He locked eyes directly with Silas, completely bypassing my shivering father. "And finally, Mr. Montgomery, Exhibit C, the exact reason you are sitting here tonight, a flawless, line-by-line forensic audit of the Peters real estate brokerage client escrow accounts over the past 48 months. Marcus dropped the final file onto the table. It sounded like a judge slamming a heavy wooden gavel. Arthur Peters has been systematically embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars directly from his clients' legally protected escrow funds. He has been laundering the stolen capital through dummy corporations in Delaware and directly wiring the stolen federal money into the private checking account of his youngest daughter, Chloe Peters, to fund her extravagant, fraudulent lifestyle. Chloe let out a loud, piercing gasp. The expensive smartphone slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the solid hardwood floor with a sharp crack. The screen shattered instantly into a massive spiderweb of broken glass, but her live stream was still actively broadcasting every single second of the humiliation to her followers. Silas Montgomery stared intensely down at the highlighted bank statements detailing the massive escrow theft. The silence in the room was so heavy it felt like being crushed beneath the ocean floor. When the billionaire finally looked up, his face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He realized instantly that his massive financial investments and his impeccable professional reputation were secretly tied to a petty, desperate thief. Silas slammed his massive fist down onto the oak table so hard the crystal water glasses rattled violently against the wood. "You absolute, pathetic parasite!" Silas roared, his booming voice shaking the very walls of the dining room. "You dare steal from the escrow accounts! You dare jeopardize my capital to fund this superficial circus!" Arthur was practically hyperventilating, his hands shaking violently as he gripped the edge of the table to keep his legs from collapsing entirely. "Silas, please, I can explain," Arthur stammered, heavy beads of cold sweat pouring down his pale forehead, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, cowardly whine. "It was just a temporary bridge loan. I was going to put every single penny back. The commercial market was incredibly tough. You have to believe me." "I am going to destroy you," Silas hissed, leaning menacingly over the table, his gray eyes blazing with lethal intent. "By Monday morning, I will personally pull every single cent of my funding from your pathetic firm. I am calling the State Real Estate Commission myself, and I will personally hand-deliver these forensic audits directly to the federal prosecutor. You are not just totally bankrupt, Arthur, you are going to die in a federal prison cell." The glamorous, impenetrable shell of the Peters family shattered completely in less than 5 minutes. Helen collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands, wailing hysterically as the terrifying reality of extreme poverty and public humiliation crashed down upon her. Chloe fell to her knees, frantically trying to pick up her broken phone, weeping uncontrollably as the digital comments section of her live stream exploded with vicious accusations and mocking laughter from the very followers she had lied to for years. Arthur stood totally frozen, gasping for air like a dying fish on dry land. His entire empire of lies, his immense arrogance, and his fake superiority reduced to a pathetic pile of ashes on my dining table. I sat perfectly still in my chair, watching the beautiful destruction unfold. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply reached forward, took a slow, deep sip of my sparkling water, and quietly relished the incredibly sweet taste of absolute, irreversible victory. Silas Montgomery proved to be a man of his absolute word. First thing Monday morning, agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, accompanied by auditors from the State Real Estate Commission, swarmed my father's downtown brokerage. They carried out dozens of heavy boxes filled with hard drives and physical ledgers, permanently locking the glass doors and immediately freezing every single corporate and personal bank account associated with his name. Arthur is currently sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting trial. The prosecution has indicted him on multiple federal counts of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and embezzlement. He is facing a mandatory minimum of 20 years behind bars. Helen did not escape the blast radius because she had knowingly benefited from the stolen funds to maintain her lavish lifestyle. The civil court judge immediately seized every single asset in her name. The court stripped her of the luxury vehicles and the country club memberships, auctioning them off to begin compensating the dozens of innocent families who had lost their escrow deposits. Chloe's descent was rapid and heavily documented because her live stream had captured the entire catastrophic dinner. The internet showed her absolutely zero mercy. Stripped of her stolen funding, she was exposed as a massive fraud. Her brand sponsors dropped her overnight to avoid going to prison herself for receiving stolen federal funds. She was forced to hastily liquidate her entire closet of designer handbags and luxury shoes just to pay off the mountains of maxed-out credit card debt she had accumulated. As for me, Marcus Vance handled the legal cleanup with his usual surgical precision. He successfully petitioned the federal court to completely expunge the fraudulent commercial loans from my credit history, fully restoring my financial identity. Furthermore, he aggressively negotiated a substantial civil settlement for the emotional and financial distress, liquidating what little remained of my father's legitimate personal estate to secure my future. I changed my phone number and permanently severed all ties with my biological family. I did not feel any gloating or triumphant joy. I only felt a profound, weightless relief. It is early Tuesday morning now. The neighborhood is completely silent. I am standing on the wraparound wooden porch I built with my own 2 hands, wrapped in a thick sweater, holding a warm mug of black coffee. The sunrise is casting a beautiful golden glow across the quiet street. I reach out and press my palm flat against the solid exterior brick wall. I had spent 6 grueling years digging out the dirt to build a strong physical foundation for this house. But as I take a deep breath of the crisp morning air, I finally realize the truth. I had not just built a house. I had built the impenetrable foundation for the rest of my free, independent life. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Maya Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.